This conference will now be recorded.
Can anyone confirm if you're able to see my screen?
Yeah, we are able to see it.
Yes.
Okay, so let's come back to the project that we're doing yesterday. And again, I don't have anything in my Azure portal. It's all wiped out. It's all zero. So this is what we were doing. We had a build pipeline. We had a release pipeline, which is going ahead and helping us create the infrastructure, meaning the first thing it's doing is that it's laying down the infrastructure. Second thing, it's going ahead and deploying the code. Third, it's going ahead and injecting some kind of a data into the SQL Server. This is what an end-to-end process of what it's trying to achieve. So let me come back again and let's give a quick glance on what we have, what we need, and how will we go forward. So we have the code, we have the ARM template, we have the SQL application, meaning we have all the code with us, and we have all the commands. We said, okay, fine, this is the command and etc. And we also went ahead and wrote a drop statement yesterday. So we said, okay, fine, we also need a drop statement in the first to drop the course database or to drop the course table if it doesn't, if it exists already. And let's go, I mean, and going ahead and we go ahead and let's say inject the data again. So we create the table again, we inject the data and so on and so forth. And then we had a build pipeline here, which is going to do a couple of things. And one of those things is firstly building your code, which is written in .NET Core. Secondly, copying the JSON files into the build.artifact staging directory. So we are doing these two things in the build pipeline, wherein I'm just going ahead and saying, okay, fine, let's do a .NET restore, build and publish. And then finally I said, okay, fine, we'll also go ahead and copy our infrastructure files. And finally, we had a release pipeline, wherein we have this pipeline out here, which is SQL Web App Release Pipeline, which is doing three things out here. On the development phase, it's telling, okay, fine, it's trying to create the infrastructure. It is trying to go ahead and let's say push the code into the Azure Web App. And finally, it's going ahead and taking all the SQL commands using things like SQL administrator user and the admin login password. It's taking both of these things and it's going ahead and deploying the code, or let's say, or injecting the data inside the database that we are creating out here. This is what we are doing. And we have a couple of variables like all the names and etc., which are generic in nature. And we have an environment variable which is scoped to a particular environment called development. So this is what we have. And what I want to do further is that there is one thing that I want to really address out here. What that one thing about here is that in the first step, I am creating the web app and the SQL server. And while I'm creating the SQL server, there is a very important credential which is called SQL administrator password that I'm passing here. In the third step also, I have something like the SQL administrator password so that I can establish a login with the SQL database and then go ahead and inject the data using my Azure DevOps pipeline. Meaning this is a very sensitive information, the username or the password, right? Both of them are very sensitive information and I need to protect this information. What do I mean by I need to protect this information is that imagine that this is your backend database and imagine that you are having a front-end web application communicating with the backend database and all that stuff. And this web application, the success or failure of this web application relies upon this particular connection string. And the connection string again relies upon the user ID and password. And guys, user IDs and password of let's say a backend database, right? This is usually a very sensitive information which we don't generally share with anyone. Very, very sensitive, because if someone has this username or password, they'll be able to log into your database, look into your data, probably steal your data, and etc. Right? So organizations are very concerned about one thing: is this admin password and the admin the admin password and, let's say, the username out here. So where's my username? Yes, this is the username. So these both, like, these are the credentials about the organizations are very much concerned about. And that's the reason I went ahead and I logged it, right? So I went ahead and I said, okay, fine, just log this out. And I said, this is a secret. Is this good enough? Up to an extent, yes. But this is not really beneficial if I look from a security perspective, meaning I as a user has logged it. But if, like me, if there is some other user who has the same amount of permission, who has the equal amount of permission, they'll be able to read this password. So the issue that I'm facing here is an issue of something known as encryption. Passwords are not encrypted on the Azure DevOps pipeline. They are just barely made a secret. They just said, okay, fine, we'll just make it as a secret. Azure DevOps enables you to do that. But it doesn't mean that your password is encrypted. It's not an encrypted nature. It's not in an encrypted format. Meaning, let's say for a very hypothetical condition is that your account gets hacked tomorrow. Someone hacks into your account. They'll be able to read all these passwords. They'll be able to write a very simple program. They'll be able to extract all these passwords and so on and so forth. So this is a security concern, and I now need to address this out. Meaning I now need to make sure that my password is not, or my username and password is not on the Azure DevOps, because I now know that this is not encrypted. I don't want to declare these values on Azure DevOps. Rather, I want to place them in a secure location, which gives me a feature called encryption. So I want to place them in a secure location. This is what I want to do. And what I am really looking for is I'm looking for something called as encryption out here. This is what I want to achieve at the end of the day. So can anyone think of any location where you, as a DevOps engineer, now you are a DevOps engineer right now, and you are designing the solution for your company, and your company tells you that, hey, you know what, this is not intended because the passwords are not encrypted. I want to go ahead and have an extra level of protection, and I want to encrypt it. So can you give me a better solution? So what can you think of to save these passwords? Where do you think that I can save this password out? Anyone? Like, if it were you, then what would you do about this?
Azure Key Vault.
Key Vault.
Hmm. Key Vault. Key Vault service, yes. So what exactly is a key vault then? So as people rightly said, you have a service in Azure called Key Vault, which is designed, or which is in place for this specific purpose. This will store sensitive information like SQL admin password, like the SQL username, and it will store it in an encrypted format. Meaning, if even someone hacks into your account, they won't be able to just go ahead and, let's say, get these passwords because they are encrypted. If they are in an encrypted format, users, let's say, won't be able to just go ahead and read it out. They need particular kind of a permissions and all that stuff. So how do I then create one? What do I do here? What exactly is this, and etc. So I'll just say create, and I'm just hitting the create button. It's a very, very simple creation. It's firstly asking me what is the name of the resource group. I do not have a name, so I'll say it is Evolve Demo. And the next thing that I'll say is that I'll say it is Demo KV US East 2000, something like this, like, just a unique name to my keyword. And I'll say the key vault is also in East US2 region for avoiding latency and everything. And then you have the pricing tier of the key vault, which is standard and premium. I'll just go for standard right now. There is something called as soft delete. Just like we looked at blobs, right? Soft delete is nothing but even if you delete the key vault, it will still stay for 90 days. You can retain it. I'll just put it as 7 days, so to make it easier for me to delete it later point in time. And I will say next. Now it's telling me access policy. It's telling that, you know what, who can access this vault and what kind of a permissions do they have. Now key vaults store three kind of things, one being keys, the other being secrets, the third being certificates. So you have keys, secrets and certificates that you can secure with your key vault, and we'll talk about that once we get into it. And it's asking me in this page, on the access policy page, that this user, which is my ID, which is classes as your devops@gmail.com, who's creating this key vault out, what kind of a permissions do they need? In my case, I have all the permissions because I'm the only user out here who's using it. So if I look at the key permissions, I have the get list, update, delete, and etc. If I have the secret permission, I have the same thing. If I have the certificate permission too, I have all the permissions that are enabled out here. Now, if you are adding a user, you can actually control what the user needs. If you don't want the user to delete something, you can remove this permission out. If you don't want the user to update something, you can remove this permission out. Just like an SAS, a shared access signature when you are working with a storage account. So for me, I just need these two permissions. I'm just saying, okay, good, I need this out. I'll say next. You can also integrate your key vault with a virtual network. You can have an actual virtual network. You can also basically go ahead and integrate your key vault with this. But for now, I'm just saying public all networks and I'm saying review and create. So all I passed here is the name, very importantly. Two is the access policy, which tells who can access the key vault, what level of access they do have. Meaning I said that there are three kinds of secrets that you can store: keys, secrets, and certificates. And I'm saying that as a user, I need access to all of those three things. And I'll say create this out. This is going to take like about a minute or two to get created. And once created, what we are going to do is that we are going to use this key vault to secure our secrets. Meaning I would like, I have a username and password. I have a SQL username and password to be precise. I want to make sure to secure them in the key vault and get them encrypted. This is what I want to do. So right now, if you look in the background, the deployment got succeeded. So I'll just go into the into the resource, and this is how it's going to look. And I'm very much interested in this area, which is called secrets. So I'll come here into the secrets, and I will say, okay, fine, generate or import a secret. And in here, I will now type the name of the secret. Now, this name of the secret is, let's say, going to be the name of this particular variable, which is SQL username. So I'll just take this, I'll just reuse it. So I'll say this is SQL username, and I'll type the password as test user. Or I'll type the username as test user. This is the name of the user that I have, and I can say create. A very, very simple creation. I had a SQL username. I went ahead. I said, okay, fine. What is the name of the password and what is the value of the password? In the similar way, I'll just go ahead and I have another password called SQL admin. I mean, I have a other key called SQL admin password. I'm taking this here, going into my Azure account, and I'll say the name is SQL admin password. I'll give you a value here. I'll type a value here. I'll say Microsoft hyphen 001. This is the value that I'm typing, and I'll say create. So I have the SQL administrator password. I have the username, both of them configured here in Azure, and in Azure DevOps pipeline is where I'm making a call to them. Because while creating, let's say, the infrastructure, while creating the ARM templates, I am referring to these secrets. Meaning I'm saying, okay, fine, SQL username is SQL username, SQL password is SQL password, SQL username and password and all that stuff. And even in the data injection phase, I'm going ahead and referring to these secrets. Sorry, this one and this one. I log in and password out here. And as of now, these are sitting here as a variable on Azure DevOps. But what I would say is that I'll remove this out right now. I don't want it here because these are not encrypted. So I'm removing the password and I am removing the username. I removed both of these values. So these values are no longer there. These values have been declared in the key vault for one specific purpose, which is to make sure that they are secured and which is to make sure that they are encrypted. So what I'll do right now in my pipeline is that I know that these secrets are coming from, these secrets are now coming from, let's say, the Azure Key Vault. So all these secrets are secured in the Azure Key Vault right now. So what I'm going to do is I will add another task here called Azure Key Vault. Very, very important, guys. I have not seen pipelines, let's say, in the actual environment without this particular task. It is like very, very important. You will have any organization that I worked with and who's using Azure DevOps will use some kind of an encryption strategy. And one of the most popularly available encryption strategies out there is an Azure Key Vault. Is an Azure Key Vault as such. So I'll say it's an Azure Key Vault, and it's going to ask me a couple of things like the Azure subscription. So I'll give my service principal or I'll give my service connection. Then it's asking me what is the name of the vault. If I just refresh this and if I just do a drop down, I'm able to see the name of the vault. Then it's asking me what secrets do you want from the vault, meaning you can have tens and thousands of secrets out here. Can you give me what is the name of the secret that you need? So I need these two secrets, which is SQL username and SQL password. And in my case, I have only these two things. I can either do SQL username comma SQL password. I can give a comma separated value. I can give a comma separated value out here, meaning this is useful when you especially have thousands and thousands of secrets and you want to just basically go ahead and download two secrets out here. But in my case, since these are two secrets, I can either give a comma separated value or I can simply give a star, telling what I need everything. Star means like what? It's a wild card. I need everything out there. And finally, I'll say make secret available to the whole job, meaning please make sure to download it and make it available to the whole job as a variable. Meaning what's going to happen right now is that once let's say the pipeline gets triggered, it will go into my key vault. It will go ahead and pull the SQL username and pull the SQL password and save them as a variable. This is going to be an in-memory variable, meaning it's not going to basically go ahead and add them in the variable section. It's not going to go inside the variable section and add them here. It's going to save it in memory of the pipeline run. So when the pipeline gets terminated, the passwords are no longer with the pipeline out here. So this is what I'm doing. I'm filtering my secrets out. I'm telling that, okay, fine. These are the secrets you need to download. And the reason I gave these names is because my entire pipeline, meaning the ARM template or everything, is referring to that particular variable. It's saying SQL username and SQL password, which is now not there on the pipeline, out here, which is now intended to come from the Azure Key Vault out here. So I'll say save and I will say added Azure Key Vault and let's say okay. Let's go ahead and create this release out. And I will just go ahead and say create. And this is now triggering, let's say, the entire task on the development phase. and let's see what it does out here. And let's try to understand what's happening with our key vault. So it's now doing an initialization of the job. It's trying to first resolve all the variables of the pipeline, and it is now basically going into the key vault and it's trying to download, and it failed. So it said pre-job Azure Key Vault, and what was it trying to do is that it was trying to download the secrets from this particular vault. So it is calling the vault. My Azure DevOps keyword or my Azure DevOps pipeline is making a call to the vault. So this is what is happening. I have the Azure DevOps task. I have the Azure DevOps pipelines here. And I have a key vault that is sitting in Azure. And my Azure DevOps is firstly making a call to this particular key vault. It's calling this key vault, and it is making to firstly list all the passwords that are there and then get the passwords. Two kind of operations it's trying to do. Firstly, it's listing, and secondly, it's trying to get the passwords and download it into the Azure DevOps pipeline. This is what it's doing, and it failed. And now it's telling, what the error is telling, that what the user, the group, or the application. So let me read this error out. It's telling the user, group, or the application app ID something like this. And if I scroll to the right, it's giving me, and it's saying does not have secret list permission on the vault. For help resolving, please go ahead and visit this documentation and etc. So what do you understand by this error, guys? What am I missing here? What do you understand by this error? Is it clear for you all? Let me copy this out and post it in the chat so that you all can take a clear look for this. You can take a clear look at this. So this is the error that I'm getting. So by this error, what do you really understand?
Permission.
Okay, but I have the permissions, isn't it? Like if I go into my vault, if I go into the key vault, and if I look at the access policy, I have these permissions. Like I said, okay, fine, it's Azure DevOps, and I have all these things out. Like I have the key permissions, the secret permissions, and etc. But it's still saying I do not have the secret, I do not have the key permissions and all that stuff. So what do you understand by this, guys? Firstly, the very important thing is to understand the error. So are everyone able to understand the error, guys?
Yes, Kiran. Some get permission is missing, something like that.
hmm So there is some issue with some permission out here. So let's try to resolve it by understanding the error only. Okay, so I am going into the error. Now this is how you need to start understanding the error, start resolving this out. You'll likely be running into these kind of errors like every time. So I'll just scroll to the right, and it said the user or the group or the application. There are three things it's talking about. It's telling either the user or a group or the application who's making a call to this keyword does not have the secret list permission on the vault. So it's clearly telling that, okay, fine, you should have a permission called the list on the vault, and you do not have. And then it's telling or the application app ID is this one, object ID is this one. It's giving you an object ID here. It's telling, okay, fine, this is an object ID of the user who's trying to make an access to the vault. This is the object ID of the user who's trying to access the vault, and he doesn't have a permission. So this is my key. If I take this object ID, this is an ID that you will find in the Active Directory. So if I go here and if I go into the Azure Active Directory, and in the Azure Active Directory, I'll just paste this out. And now it's returning me some value telling that it is DevOps master connection. What is this, guys? What do you think is this? Why is it pointing out to this particular DevOps master connection? What do you think is this one? Anyone?
The service connection, right?
Service connection, exactly. Meaning, if you look at the task of the Azure Key Vault, I am not making a call to the Azure Key Vault using my credentials. These are my credentials which have the access on the vault, but I'm not making a call to the Azure Key Vault using my credentials, but I'm using a service connection to go ahead and make a call onto the vault. I'm taking the service connection and I'm using this particular service connection that is established between Azure and Azure DevOps. I'm using this service connection I'm using this service connection as my tool or as my link to go into the Key Vault and download the secret. But this service connection has, let's say, some kind of an owner access onto the entire subscription. Should it not automatically get permissions onto the vault? No, it will not. The key vault rather is controlled by the access policy, and the service connection needs to have access policy onto the vault. It's not me, but I had to give a service connection and access. So how do I do this? So I came into my key vault, I clicked on the access policy, and I'll say add an access policy. I will say, okay, fine, add an access policy now. And I'll just click on this drop down. I'll select the first thing, key secret and certificate management, which will give me access like 9 key permissions, 7 secret permissions, and 15, let's say, certificate permissions out here. And I have something called as a service principal out here. Now it's asking me to which user or to which group or to which application should I go ahead and allocate the access, should I give the access to? And it says none selected. So I'll go here and I'll say click here on none selected, and I will now choose the name, or I'll now basically enter the name of the service connection, which was DevOps master, something like this, master service connection. So I'll just take this out and I'll say select, I'll say add, and I'll say save. This is what I want to do. And just to make sure that I'm double sure on this, just in case I'm using an ARM template, I want to allow the secrets into the ARM template. So I'm just selecting these two options and I'll say save. So I'm
We can,
selecting a couple of options here. Yeah, please go, sorry.
yeah, sorry, sir. We can use service connection, same service connection anytime, right? We don't want to create
Yes,
again service connection.
no,
Okay.
you don't want to create another one. I'm reusing the same service connection, meaning this is the service connection that I do that I do have right now. This is the service connection that I'm using. The name of service connection is different, but if I want to make sure that this is the same service connection, I can just click on manage, and this will give me the service connection out here, which is called shared. And I can say manage service connection rules, or I can say manage service principal as such. And this will take me directly to the Azure portal and tell me what is the service connection in Azure that I'm using. Same thing. So this is the service connection in Azure that I'm using. I'm just taking this out and I'm making sure to whitelist it, or I'm making sure to give it the right access policy on the Key Vault. So you can also see what is the service connection from this page. You can click on manage, you'll come here. You can say manage service principal and you'll come here. So you'll basically understand, or you'll basically know on what service connection this is. Or you can directly from the error message take the object ID, paste it in, let's say, the active directory, and it will itself tell you what is the service connection you are making a call to. Is that okay?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so I have the service connection, etc. I have made sure that this particular service connection has the access onto the vault, and now I'll try to redeploy it. So I'm not making any change onto my Azure pipeline because this is a permission issue, and I'll say added service connection on the access policy. And let me say deploy. And this will now start the deployment, and it will now basically go ahead and initialize my pipeline. So it's now basically initializing the Azure agent job. Now the first thing it will do after downloading the artifact, or before downloading the artifact, is that it will first try to see whether it has the access to the particular key vault. So the first thing it's doing is that it's going ahead into the key vault. It's just going ahead and trying to download it, and now it doesn't give any issue. And if you look at this, it said, okay, fine, I'm now downloading the secrets. Number of secrets found is 2. There are 2 secrets in your vault enabled, and they are not expired, so I'll go ahead and download it out. It's saying download the secret value for SQL admin password, download the secret for SQL username. These are the 2 things that I've declared, and I will make it available for the entire job. So when the infrastructure is getting created, now the infrastructure is actually getting created right now. And if I go into my portal, it created a dev RG inside which it's starting the deployment, and it is going ahead and trying to create, let's say, all the resources out here. It's trying to create the server and etc. And it is now getting the passwords and everything from the key vault. So it's able to get the passwords and all those things from the key vault out here. And now I'm able to pass the same user ID and the same password into my tasks. This is what I'm ending up doing right now. So any questions till here, guys? Anyone, anything till here? The pipeline is going to take like about 2 to 3 minutes to run. So any questions till then? Anyone, anything? Are you all able to follow this, guys? Anyone who's not able to follow it? Anyone who's not able to follow it? Any questions still here? Anyone, any questions still here?
I'm full. We're full.
Okay. Great. So this is going to take like about 2 to 3 minutes, and now it's going ahead and creating. Now it's going ahead and creating, let's say, the database. It's going ahead and creating the web application. It's trying to establish the connection and etc. And if you also want to understand what is the template that's being used here in order to deploy all these things out, you can just click on template to understand what is the input template, and you can see what is the template that I'm passing. And even in here, you won't be able to see, let's say, the SQL username and password. You will not be able to see this out. So I'm saying, okay, fine, this is parameters and all that stuff, and it's not exposing the SQL administrator password or let's say the ID and etc. It's able to securely manage all these things. So you can go ahead into this particular template and you can understand what is the template that you're getting. You can also troubleshoot it in that way. Now the deployment is done. It's now going ahead doing an Azure web app deploy, and finally it'll go ahead and inject the data. This is what the pipeline now it's trying to do, is that it went ahead and created all this infrastructure. It said, okay, fine, the resource group exists, false. It said, okay, fine, the resource group does not exist. I will go ahead, add the resource group called devrg. Now I'll just go ahead and let's say it's saying resource group successfully created. And after the creation, it went ahead and started a deployment into the resource group. So I am not creating the resource group manually. I'm now creating the resource group using Azure DevOps tasks. And finally, it is now doing a code deployment inside the Azure web app that I've created. And finally, it will go ahead and do a data injection. And this is only for one stage yet. Until now, I've only been dealing with one particular stage, which is a development. But I want multiple stages. That's where I will now start using all my concepts. So once this pipeline is done, once the data injection is done, which should be pretty straightforward, it's going ahead and getting the connection. It'll try to inject the data. The data injection is also done, and this is my end-to-end release right now, which has wherein I've addressed the security and etc. And this is working. Once this is done, I'll just say edit pipeline, and I'll go inside my pipeline right now. And I need multiple stages like QA, I need prod and all that stuff. So firstly, I'll just go ahead and convert all my tasks into a task group. I'll say this is SQL Infra task group. I'm doing a task group right now, and I'm saying create. And now it's asking me for all these values out here. So let me do one thing. We say manage this task group. So I'm doing a right click here and I'm saying manage this task group, and I need to pass all these values, guys. I just need to pass all these values on the task group level. So what I'm going to do is I'll just make a copy of it, and I'll say this is the default value. And even for the username, I'll say this is the default value. So I'm giving username and passwords out here. I'll say save. And if I now just refresh this out, I now have all these tasks here. I'll just say add, and I'll call this task group right now. Pull it all the way up, and I don't need all these tasks. I can just remove them out, because now the task group is making sure to substitute all of these. And I will now clone my environments. I'll say this is QA. I'll have another environment called, let's say, staging and or production directly. So I have 3 environments right now, and going into my variables, I'll need to make sure to map my right variables to the right environments. So for QA, it's going to be QA. For prod, it's going to be prod. Finally, save it out. And I can also basically go ahead and add the approvers. So for QA, I'll add an approver here. Let's say pre-deployment conditions, and I'll say approvers. I'll say the approval here is rback at gmail.com. This is the approver. And in this phase also, I'll just basically go ahead and add an approver here. So I'm just adding the same approvers here because that's the only person in my entire Azure organization. And I've added the approvers, and my pipeline is now ready. And if I now trigger the release, it's going to go ahead directly into the development stage. From development, it's going to go into the QA, and at QA, it's going to ask me for the approval. And from QA, it's going into the prod. It's asking me for the approval out here. So this is how I am reusing my task groups and my variables. And I'm not again changing, or I'm not again adding any variables out here. I'm just changing the name of the variable, meaning the name of the environment for each and every variable out here. And I'm done. And I'm done. This is how I'm making use of the knowledge that I had about the task groups. And you can also basically go ahead and add multiple variable groups if you like to. But the main crux of it is that how do you play around with something known as an Azure Key Vault, and what is the significance of something called as an Azure Key Vault out here? Is that okay, guys? Any questions still here? Anyone? Any questions still here? Any questions still here, guys? Okay. Now, everything that we did till now, guys, is that we created the pipelines, build and release all these things, right? So we were here, I believe. Let's see. We are here and we created the build and release pipelines and everything. And when we were creating the build and release pipeline, let's say I would like to create a new pipeline. So you would have started here. You would have said new pipeline and you would have clicked on, let's say, this one, use classic editor to create a pipeline without YAML. Then what is YAML here? Like, what about this? Why are we not using it yet? What is the reason that we are not using it yet? Is that we need to understand about a language called YAML. The full form of it is called YAML ain't a markup language. It's called this. Called YAML ain't a markup language. Meaning, unlike HTML or unlike, let's say, JSON, YAML doesn't have a syntax. It's is what the makers of YAML are trying to tell you. But why do you need this? Why do you really go? I mean, why do you need this out? What makes it different for a pipeline that you create with YAML and with something known as classic editors? And what is the advantage of YAML is that over a period of, let's say, the last 4 or 5 years, when I started with Azure DevOps, when I'm talking about that time when I started with Azure DevOps, we did not have this option at all called YAML. Like there was no option called YAML at all. There was only classic editors. Azure was only allowing us to go ahead and write pipelines with classic editors. Let's say I have multiple projects in my organization. I'm working for an organization. I have multiple projects here. 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. Now I want to make sure that this pipeline that we created, right? This is just amazing because it has a key vault, it has all the security features and etc. So this pipeline is something that I want to replicate in a different project of my organization or in a different organization altogether in a different project. Let's say I want to implement the same kind of a pipeline out here. Now then, should I look at this pipeline and let's say go into a different organization? Sorry, let me unpin this. So if I basically want to do this, should I go into, let's say, the different organization? For example, let's say probably this project out here, and I want to make sure to create a release pipeline here with, let's say, something like SQL Web App Release. So if I want to do this right now, I will have to make sure to look at this, look at the tasks, understand the tasks and etc. And I'll have to design the same thing here, meaning I have to make it redundant. This is becoming redundant for me. Meaning I am now looking for a solution to just go ahead and migrate my pipelines. I want a kind of a migration out here, meaning from one project to the other. I just want to easily do a lift and shift approach, meaning take this pipeline here, dump it somewhere, and something like that. Can I migrate it? Yes, you can. Like the answer is yes, but this is a tricky process again. If I go into the pipeline, if I click on these three dots, I have an option to export it. If I export it, I get a JSON file here. So if I just open this JSON file, so I went here into the pipeline, just clicked on this three dots and I said download this out or just say export this out. And this is how the file actually looks like. Like this is the JSON file what you get when you download a pipeline, which is like I'll tell you, which is like really painful to read. Like this is like really painful to read. This is how long this is, and even it's not properly formatted. So even if I want to format it, say I select all and do a right click here and I say format selection, I can format it, but it's still very much difficult for me to go ahead and read it, go ahead and let's say write my own pipeline So I have this pipeline. Does it mean that this is does it mean that this is a solution for everything? Meaning, if I go into this project called Terraform, and if I want to create a new pipeline, I'll say new. I can say import a release pipeline, and I'll say import from a JSON file, and I'll go into my download section, take this JSON, I'll say open this out, and I'll say okay. I will get something, meaning I will get the same pipeline here, but there are a lot of things that I need to basically work on. I have all this pipeline, I have the entire definition. So I have which like web app copy and etc. I have the entire definition. I was able to do a lift and shift, but this is not still user friendly. Like I still have to go here, I still have to make sure to again redo my task groups, because that was the main idea, right? I wanted my entire task group, but now I'm not getting the task group because that task group is not there in this project. So a lot of things out here. So a lot of things basically that I need to redo, and even the variables are not like that great. It's not like that pleasant looking and etc. And the pipeline is throwing me all kind of an errors here. I won't be able to save it out. So this is a little tricky to begin with. It's not little tricky, but if this is just like 3-stage pipeline, what if I were looking at, let's say, a 12-stage pipeline with, let's say, about 20 tasks in each and every stage? This my job is going to get much and much complicated if I do this, which is not really easy, which is not really easier to play around with. That's where YAML as an alternative comes into picture. Now in YAML, you can write pipelines. Till now, I have been designing pipelines, meaning using something known as classic editor. I have been designing a pipeline, but I am now telling that you can write a pipeline using this particular YAML language, which makes your pipeline just like any other file. I'm writing my pipeline in a file called .yml or .yaml YAML. This is what I'm actually going ahead and trying to do, is that I'm just trying to write my pipeline here. And what I will be doing, or how will my end product look like? So just giving you a very high overview. So let me go, let me say leave. I don't want to save this out. And let me see if I have any YAML pipelines. Yes, I do. And if I edit this pipeline, it's going to look something like this. So instead of designing my pipelines, I'm now writing my pipelines. I'm now writing my pipelines and I'm saving it in a file inside my repository. I have a file, I have a branch, I'm saving it in my branch inside my repository, and I am also version controlling this file, meaning I can see what are the commits made, and I can also basically control it in such a way that if someone wants to update my pipeline, they will have to update it through a pull request. These are the advantages of YAML, meaning you can write your pipeline, you can easily lift and shift it. Like now, if I want to create a new pipeline, I just need to copy the entire YAML code, copy it, go into a different project and paste it out. It makes it that simple. Reason why most of the projects right now are shifting towards the YAML approach. Like most of the projects have now understood the power of YAML, and even Azure has clearly indicated, even Azure DevOps has clearly indicated that if I say Azure DevOps documentation, if I look at that, it says this is pipeline documentation, etc. And if I say key concepts for someone to write a pipeline, etc., they are now telling you to write a pipeline in YAML. They are now telling, okay, fine, this is the YAML pipeline editor, this is what we given, etc. Most of these things is something that they are now talking about YAML. Most of these things is something that they are now talking in that particular language. So even Microsoft is clearly indicating that even they want to move in the same direction, because of which we need to understand how to write the YAML pipelines. And even before we understand how to write this YAML pipeline, we need to read about, or we need to know about this language called YAML. It's a very, very, very simple language. We need to understand what the syntax of the language is, and then we will start our journey with the YAML pipeline, guys. Now, my request for you all today is that please practice this out, and if you all find time, just go to YouTube and just say YAML basics. Just learn about what YAML language is. It's a very simple, straightforward language. I'll any which ways take a class tomorrow on what are the basics of YAML and what are those things and etc. And let's start writing pipelines in YAML, guys. This is the goal that we want to go ahead and achieve. So any questions there, guys? Anyone, any questions till here? Anyone, any questions? Okay, so the assignment for today is just go to YouTube and just type in YAML basics. Just follow any video. I am not really particular about one video. Just try to get the gist of it. Just try to understand the gist of what YAML is, and we will cover this. We'll cover this YAML topic in tomorrow's session. Till then, thank you guys, and have a great day ahead.